It's the story of an American held in a dark Venezuelan prison.
Then all of a sudden, they all kind of lined up. They pointed their guns at me. And this is the point where I thought, I'm going to die today.
I'm Becky Bruce. I spent a year working on Hope in Darkness, which now has more than 2 million downloads. Find it on kslpodcast.com or wherever you listen to podcasts.
Hey, it's Casey Scott, one of the hosts of Project Recovery Podcast. My road to recovery started with Pinnacle Recovery Center. If you or someone you know is suffering, do what I did. Call Pinnacle Recovery Center, 801-830-3355, or check them out online, pinnaclerecoveryut.com. Back here with Project Recovery, we got Andy Gold here, stand-up comedian. He's talking about when he was in the rooms at Clear Creek, was that right?
Cold Creek.
Cold Creek.
Yes.
And you said you weren't into the hippy-dippy stuff, the sage.
No, I wasn't into a lot of that. I couldn't get on board with just like a white guy with a ponytail coming over and trying to get us on board with like old Native American traditions.
And we've said that in this podcast before, is that your recovery is your recovery. And I remember when I was up at Pinnacle Recovery Center, we had some ladies saying you need to stand up and bless your water to the east, north, south, west. And I was like, I'm never going to do that. I come down from breakfast and there's 2 guys out there by the river blessing their water. And I was going to light them up. I was going to go, this is absolutely ridiculous. But then I remember stopping and going, who am I to take this away from them? If
Correct.
that works for them, then I say go with it.
And it's not like you don't got a lot of work to do on yourself.
Yeah.
Either.
I'm going to focus on me and what's working for me and then run with that. And if that's working for them, that's working for them. You said you were more into the science-based.
I was more into the science base, and then the other thing that took, and it was a slow burn for me to get this program to take, but it was the rooms and the 12 steps. Now, we were talking before how the 12 steps, you had some problems with it and you were critical. Oftentimes, I agree with a lot of the criticisms. The reason the 12 steps took for me is just because it was the most prominent and available option. Those meetings were everywhere, and it was really easy for me to go to a room with other people who get it.
I think that's definitely one of the benefits of 12-step programs is they're so available, and especially when you're early in your recovery, you need that support, right?
You do need that support because I was talking about how I felt like a monster and a psychopath, and I would go to these rooms and hear other people who had, a good amount of clean time under their belt telling these same kind of stories. And I was like, okay, this is good. This is a thing. This is comforting.
And for those who don't know, 12-step, they have meetings almost every hour of the day throughout, 24 hours.
And even in talking about it, like I'm open about my recovery. Like you're not supposed to talk about it at the level of like press, radio, or films. I've pretty much blatantly break that rule and say I'm a member. So I don't work the strictest, most, orthodox, I guess, program. And in fact, I'm bothered by a lot of the dogma in the rooms. We were talking about how if somebody finds something that works for them, like encourage them, go do your thing. And I think a problem in those rooms sometimes is say this is the only way. If you don't do it this way, your chances of failure are 100%. And that kind of dogma sort of, it makes me cringe a little bit.
You found some good supportive things there.
I think what you were telling me, you like the community and you like the relatability of the other addicts in the room.
Yeah, and I did like working the steps. I had to perform some mental gymnastics to get them to adhere to my outlook and my value systems, but those mental gymnastics were allowed. And I, just like recovery as a whole, I took what I liked and kind of do what I will with the rest. And it continues to be a good program for me. And
was it at this time? So you've left the hospital, you survived your overdose, you felt that outpouring of love and support, and went into this recovery program and started to connect with 12 steps and the science behind recovery in the brain. Is that also when you started to do that realization that I'm not the addict, I'm this other person? Was that happening yet, or was it after that?
It was after that realization started to sink in after treatment. When I was back in the world, when I had opportunities to lie, to steal, to use. I was more on the path to recovery, and I was more enthusiastic about the path to recovery.
So you did 45 days inpatient.
Yes.
And then right out of that, you started going to the rooms. And that's what they say when you go to a 12-step meeting, is you find a room that you kind of like and that kind of, goes along with the way your attitude is, because every room has a different feel.
Yeah. And I started, and this is very unique to my experience, I started stand-up comedy about 6 months after I got clean.
Had you ever done that before?
Nope. Wasn't even that big of a stand-up comedy fan. I was always like the funny rascal growing up. I was always told that I was funny. Andy, you should be a comedian.
Class clown.
Yeah, I had no desire to be a comedian.
So how does one go from, overdosing on grandma's birthday to 45 days of inpatient treatment to working the rooms in a 12-step program to going, I think I'm going to get on stage and tell some jokes? I mean, was there something in your life that you thought was funny that you wanted to share?
Well, there's two things that happened. Number one of two channels worked in rehab, A&E and Comedy Central. Everything else was fuzzy. And Comedy Central was running this whole marathon of stand-up specials. And during my downtime, because there wasn't much else to do, I watched a lot of stand-up and became a fan. And I'm like, I dig this medium. I like this. This is fun. And I became a fan of some comics. Mitch Hedberg was the first comic I really fell in love with. Then I found out he was actually a heroin addict who didn't make it. And then I needed something fun to do. The rooms were fine, the fellowship was fine, but I needed something fun and cool to do. I didn't just want to be some dude who was just walking around being sober and not doing anything that was I heard some people in the room I'm sober and that's good enough for me. I'm like, nah, I want something that's cool. That's exciting.
You wanted something more.
I wanted something more, man. I wanted a new life. I was really exploring a new life. And I found out about Wise Guys open mic, and I didn't have a car at the time, so I had to take the front runner into Salt Lake. Then I had to take the tracks up to Trolley Square, where it was at the time.
Raise your hand if you're taking the front runner right now. I'm a front runner.
And I tried it and it didn't go. It went fine. I didn't have the chops yet. I didn't really understand what stand-up was all about.
Do you remember your first joke?
Yeah, I do. It was bad. It was not good. It was about how I was a third-generation garden center worker. And I just said that in a funny cadence. It could not be a joke. It doesn't qualify as a joke or an interesting thought. But, yeah, it was.
You're making me laugh.
Yeah, there's some stuff that I was sharing.
How did back just real quick? Because I have so much curiosity about this process that you're going through. I think it's fascinating. So what affected you? You started watching the Comedy Central channel because obviously
there's no other option.
There wasn't another option, and you were a class clown kind of kid.
Yeah.
But what did that do for you? Sitting, because Casey and I've talked about this. We're both big fans of stand-up comedy, and I love that Netflix has this investment in stand-up comedy now, and I know what it does for me to laugh. And I can talk about the psychology of how laughing changes your brain and changes your outlook. Could you talk about how was that important, or was it just a distraction while you were inpatient?
No, it was important. It was important.
In what way?
I have to find a way to have fun in recovery, man.
Which has got to be hard to do.
I thought the fun times were over.
A lot of times in my recovery, when I'm walking around and I'll make a joke, I hear this a lot. Too soon? Is it too soon?
Yeah.
And for me, it's never too soon because it's how I process stuff and it's how I deal with it. But sometimes my comedy and the way my outlook on life is, for other people, it's too soon. And I realize that.
Yeah, and when you become a professional funny man, that's when you actually have to respect that if you want to do your job properly, respect the audience's perception on what is too soon and their sensibilities and stuff like that. And that's when... that's a big jump from just a dude who's funny with your friends to somebody who actually does it. And for me, that took years. It takes most comics years. But it was needing something fun to do and cool to do. And that's what it was. But when it was really big is a few months later after going to open mics every single week. And I started to get good. I started really paying attention to how I was writing jokes, what was working, and getting laughs, and then getting spots on real shows, opening for comics. And it still, I didn't think of it as a career path or anything like that, but it was now something that I was actually good at. And that was a big moment for me because I don't think I had found something in my life that I was good at before.
Well, it sounds like you went from age 14 to partying, and that was your identity.
Yeah, and now here I am about 26. I started comedy when I was almost 26. And I was like, oh, wow, I'm good at this. This isn't just something fun. Like, the guy who owns the clubs likes me. He's responding to my emails and booking me. He's like saying, you're doing great. And a lot of my act was about being a recovering heroin addict. I didn't watch the news. I didn't watch pop culture stuff. My act was about my own life. And when you're in early recovery, your whole life is, don't pick up, don't you? And I wasn't dirty or vulgar or anything, but my stuff was heavy. You know,
Did you find it therapeutic to kind of work out that stuff that's in your head into your comedy and get it out there to the public? Or did you not even think that?
No, I really just felt like I wanted to go up there and do a good job and get laughs and be a good performer. I was just kind of zeroed in on the comedy itself of writing jokes, cutting out the fat, seeing what works. I got really sucked into the actual comedy. Obsessed might be a good word. I was really obsessed with comedy for a little while. It was my new passion. It was something I had found that I was actually passionate about too.
One of the factors that plays into people when we look at research on happiness is creativity. Are we involved in creative processes? And it kind of sounds to me like maybe for the first time in your life, I mean, it sounds like you were working hard at, you're using terms like writing jokes, cutting out the fat. That tells me you're sitting there with a pencil or on your computer really analyzing and going through these jokes, thinking about what worked, what didn't. That's a real creative process. Was that the first time you'd ever experienced something like that, and how did it affect your mood?
It was the first time I experienced anything like that on a productive level.
Yeah.
Like I said, I was the class clown, but that only got me in trouble.
But that's not creativity. That's reactive, right? You're already kind of funny, smart aleck.
But I knew the funny was there.
Yeah.
And this is my first experience actually harnessing it into something that was productive and channeling it into, I felt like actually using it for the potential it has. And the reason it was powerful is, as I said before, it was like, oh, I found out something I'm good at. This is cool. This is exciting.
And you're slowly getting that reinforcement. The owner of the club liked you. People were starting to laugh.
The other comics are saying, seen that new Andy Gold kid? Like, he's good. Oh, yeah, the heroin guy? Yeah, the heroin guy's funny.
Why did you go to talking about your own experience with heroin instead of topical things?
I knew it would be unique. That's part of it. And the other thing is that was what was on my mind. Being in early recovery and writing comedy. Those two things dominated my thoughts. I was still having cravings a lot. This was less than a year clean. I'm thinking about using all the time.
So this wasn't an easy process.
Oh, no. Early recovery was tough, but I had started to kind of explore the idea of being a clean and sober person more than just I'm a junkie and that's who I am.
That's why I love having people in here to share their stories, because I'm listening to yours and there's similarities in mine, and not the DOC, but I think to myself, you're a year out, you're doing well, you're writing comedy, but for some out there listening that might be a dangerous place for you to play in, because most comedy clubs serve alcohol.
True.
It's the entertainment industry, so there's usually some drugs involved. Not a lot, but but it is there.
There's comics who party for sure. And as I've gone out and done more, and I've done more festivals and stuff like that, there's a huge partying elements to it. The fact is, I got to live in this world. All right? I can't just stay at home and just go from safe place to safe place.
Because then you don't feel like you've actually addressed your addiction.
No, and I just don't want to live that way. And even if I just put all of my energy into going from safe place to safe place, well, eventually I'm going to stumble onto a place that is not safe.
And how are you going to be able to react if you haven't?
So the world out there is full of stuff that, for me, is not. There's going to be triggers. There's going to be that. And it's like, I have to live in this world. I have to live a life that I want to live. And these things are going to be out there. These triggers are going to be out there. Okay? When I got off the front runner, I had to walk up 4th South, past Pioneer Park, past the shelter, past all of that. Those are my old stomping grounds to go up to Trolley Square.
For people listening, that's the homeless shelter And why was that your old stopping grounds?
That's where when I couldn't get a hold of one of my dealers, I would go park there, and I would walk from corner to corner until another junkie came up and just said,
so you're actually walking through the area where you used to buy drugs.
Yeah. But here's something that's really cool. After a year or so, 4 South to me was the walk I took to go do comedy. That's what it meant to me.
Oh, that's brilliant.
Like when I thought about walking up 4 South, I'm like, I'm on my way to go do some comedy. That's what it was.
So you had reframed that whole experience, and that walk took on a totally different meaning after a year.
And
wow,
I had to walk up 4 South to get to Trolley Square, and that's what I mean. Like, so when I go out and I do shows, recovery shows, I do a show called Addicted to Comedy. I'm going to LA here in a bit, and I'm going to Chicago later, then Atlanta, and some of them are at spots that are at comedy clubs. And when I reach out to people in recovery, I say, yeah, but you still got to be in this world. The venue, they support what the show is. They're not going to enforce a 2-drink minimum. But you know what? There might be some normal people there, and they might have a drink or two. But if
do people reach out to you and they're concerned about that?
Sometimes, yeah. And I say, well, this is where comedy happens. And if you want to come see some comedy from a person who's just like you, that's going to be what you're going to have to do. If you can't handle that, I'm not going to, no shame. But if you want to be a comedy fan and you're in recovery, then you're going to have to go to comedy clubs.
Well, I like this theme that both you guys have talked about, Casey, on other shows as a little bit more than today. But you're both talking about, I think it's a dilemma that people must struggle with every single time that they're in recovery is, how do I live in the real world? How can I be happy and productive in that world and still maintain my sobriety? Do I have to hide? And it sounds like from the get-go you were like, I can't hide, and I can't be dour. I can't be down. I need to be myself, which is kind of a fun, happy guy.
And there's no alternative. This is the only world. There's just this one. All right, with all of those things out there, they're going to be triggers and temptations. So the only other alternative is just to stay in, I don't even know what you would do. I can't even really articulate an alternative. If you're going to be in it,
maybe some people hide and they don't go out, and their life in essence the joy of their life sort of goes to a halt in order to maintain their sobriety. And I'm not sure that's that wouldn't, to me as a psychologist, I would say that's probably not maintainable.
Well, see, for me, I got sober so I could live. Mm-hmm. I didn't get sober so I can hide.
Yeah, that's perfect. Yeah.
Absolutely. And that's all I can say is that, I want to live. And I'm going to have to go out there, and there's going to be some tough road ahead. But if I stay the course, I can do this.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And one of the big lies I told myself in active addiction is this is the fun life, which, of course, is a huge lie because that life was not fun at all.
Horrible.
It was a horrible life. The life I got now is fun. And I'm as enthusiastic now. I'm going to Chicago to do comedy, Atlanta. I'm traveling around the whole United States, going to new places, meeting new people, doing different things. This is light years more fun.
People used to say, man, you got the best life. And I go, if you only knew. If you think sitting on a deck by yourself and drinking a 12-pack is great, that's not living.
That's despair.
That's isolation, and that's just miserable.
Right.
But Andy, I think you said it well. That's the lie people tell themselves until they have a shift in perspective, a change in how they see themselves. They realize this isn't the happy life. This isn't the fun life.
Yeah.
But that maintains use, right? That maintains your drug use.
Absolutely. It's the addict mind is, I don't know, man. It's a tricky, manipulative thing that will tell you, in retrospect, obvious lies, but at the time are completely just convincing and reasonable. And I think another one I remember is recovery just seems like it's too much work. I'm like, no, active addiction. That's the life that was a lot of work.
Sounds like a lot of effort.
Waking up in the morning dope sick with no money and no dope, and now that whole day is going to be lying, stealing, finagling, doing whatever I have to, sometimes even ripping off a drug dealer, all right, giving him a 1.
It does sound like a Tarantino movie.
Yeah, that's a hard-working, stressful.
Yeah.
That's a lot more work than recovery.
Yeah.
And, yeah.
I want to hear a little bit about now you've been 9 years. Is it
9 years?
9 years sober.
10 years on the 21st of.
Oh, congratulations! That's a big deal.
Thank you.
And now you're out doing, like you said. I think you're having a more fun life than I am. He's traveling all over the place, having a good time.
Chicago.
What is it like
LA?
for you? Talk a little bit about that. I want to hear what's it like to be on stage and tell jokes. And are you still doing jokes about your life? Are you really still really personal and talking about recovery and those things in your comedy?
Yeah, my whole act is still autobiographical. As I get more clean time under my belt, I talk more about dating. I talk about my girlfriend, talk about my relationship with my family, stuff like that. But a central theme is still recovery. And interestingly enough, as I was kind of starting to get a little bit bored with that, I thought, I'm going to run this well dry pretty soon.
You were the Heroin comic.
I was, yeah. But a couple of comics who do something called the Addicts Comedy Tour asked me to come on the road with them. And I didn't even know that was a niche or a career path. And I said, okay, cool. So I had to find a way to keep having a kind of a recovery-based act.
A theme, yeah.
And at first that was discouraging, but it actually became a really cool challenge, And I have jokes now about the difference between 10 years clean and 1 year clean, what it's like talking to people who are self-righteous with 20 years clean and what have you. And what's been cool is the act, when I do normal shows, it plays the same. I figured out a way to not make it so specific. And I still do the Addicts Tour, and I go out and I do more stuff on my own. Andy Gold Addicted to Comedy is what it's called. And then I do regular shows, too. At Wise Guys Ogden, doing some regular shows. I'm doing a run up through Idaho, Wyoming, and Montana, doing regular shows that aren't themed around recovery. But the act is pretty much the same. And I've been happy to see I found a way to make the act
Why
play.
do you think it plays so well in different rooms?
Because I think funny is funny.
Funny is funny.
Funny is funny, but I'm also careful not to use super specific recovery language.
Okay.
All right, I'm not going to go up and do 5 minutes on step 11.
You don't want to sound like an inside joke that nobody gets.
Exactly.
What is step 11?
Step 11 is a prayer and meditation. Yeah, but I'm not going to go up and riff.
That's funny right there. Prayer and meditation.
Right.
I don't know.
Yeah. But I will talk about everybody knows what a heroin addict is. People are familiar with the word withdrawals. People are familiar with the stereotypes of junkies. I play with how this doesn't look like the stereotypical heroin addict. I look like a bully from a 1990s Disney movie. All right? And have some fun with that. And people get it. But I don't just make it super specific. It's not that hard. Just, is this something that somebody would get? Or is this something that only old Bill in the John Deere hat who's been going to the rooms for 30 years will get?
Gotcha.
So, yeah.
So how is the relationship with your family now?
It's good, man. It's really good. I think the only source of tension is I'm not quite as Mormon as they would like. But they know I'm a good person. I'm respectful of the faith. I try not to be a bitter ex-Mormon. I think resentment is toxic, and I don't want that in my life. And when I was in the hospital, overdosed, and in the ICU, the people who came to visit me, it was a lot of Mormons. It wasn't my drug buddies. So that's something that I'm mindful of. I'm like, oh, these people got my back.
Sounds like you feel a level of acceptance for who you really are. When I think a lot of times a person, when they're actively using, they're deceptive.
Yes.
And that's a big part of people who love them can't connect with them. Mm-hmm. And now you're being authentic, you're being yourself, and you find that even though the authentic you today isn't necessarily what your parents envisioned for you as an adult, they're accepting of who you are?
Yeah, that's very well said. Perfect. And that's exactly right. Being comfortable in your own skin. And if you're doing right by you, you ought to be comfortable in your own skin. I got nothing to feel guilty about or embarrassed about or anything like that. That doesn't mean it's perfect. Like I said, it's still kind of a source of tension sometimes. And sometimes I can work a little bit blue in my comedy. Like my parents found my Twitter feed and they were not happy. But I've put them through a lot worse, and they know that. And I think, sometimes Andy's act, I hope the bishop doesn't see his Twitter feed, or that might be embarrassing for us. But they also understand how important comedy is for me and how it's become this exciting, meaningful career path. And a lot of it is built on from that really dark, horrific time in my life, which gives it even more depth and meaning. And I think even though I might say a little bit too many swears or talk too much about people's private parts, they understand the bigger picture.
But private parts are always funny.
Hey, man, it's nature.
That's right.
Yeah.
Hey, thank you for being honest. I really appreciate you sharing your story. I've got one last follow-up question for you. If you think the only show you would have got in rehab would have been Diesel Brothers, do you think you'd be a mechanic today?
That's a good maybe. I was in a spot where I was open to all kinds of possibilities that would have not been a junkie. So,
Can I actually, because I've been holding back a thought this whole time because I didn't want to get off on a tangent, but thank you. That's a perfect. Yeah, I want to see what you both think of this. I think that it was fortuitous, of course, that it wasn't Diesel Brothers and it was Comedy Central. Uh-huh. But we talked earlier in the show about identity development in your adolescence, and you were a class clown, funny kid, and then I think drugs and alcohol and drugs came with that. But I think you were able to reconnect with a healthy part of your identity, right? So it wasn't a foreign thing like maybe fixing diesel trucks would have been. But the funny part, it was kind of like, that's not a bad part of me. That was part of my development that was healthy and good, and there's nothing wrong with it. And with the drugs out of the way, you've used comedy to reconnect to yourself. It's very authentic. And I wanted to know what you thought about that. But that's what I've been holding back in my head for half the show now, is thinking, well, no wonder he ended up in comedy, because he was able to embrace a healthy part of himself that's always been there.
No, that's very astute. You're a good psychologist.
Oh, why, thank you.
Yeah. That's exactly right, though. Remember, I was talking about feeling like an outsider. Because, not to say my brothers and my dad are without humor, but they didn't have it like I had it. They were serious men. When it was time to go deer hunting, you woke up at 5 a.m., you packed your stuff, you kept a notepad of everything, organized, compartmentalized, and I just wasn't that way. And I was a creative kind of person who operated differently, and I thought that was like a deficiency. And I did have that exact realization, like, that's actually not a deficiency. There's actually a use for this kind of person.
Yeah, and I think sometimes when you're a kid, being labeled the class clown isn't a compliment from the adults. And so maybe it wasn't until you became an adult that needed that comedy, you realize this is a healthy, good part of who I am.
It's a skill. It's a talent.
And it's not something that everyone always appreciated, but now it's able to come to the forefront in who you are.
Yeah, and no, I think that's beautifully said. I don't even know if I can add anything onto that, but I've had that thought a lot. So when I'm performing my act, I never talk about deep, meaningful stuff like this, because, of course, that's not how comedy works. But
it's the exact opposite of comedy.
Right. But it continues to be a huge source of gratitude for me. And even though I don't consider myself an especially spiritual person, there's all kinds of miraculous elements that have come into it that I can't quite explain that are a huge source of gratitude for me and spirituality. And me giving a lot of my recovery credit to a certain something that I cannot explain that is indeed more powerful than me and exists as far as I'm concerned. And it might not be tangible, it might not be a deity, but there were a completely improbable set of circumstances that came together and made this all loop around that I'm mindful of and that I feel. And that's very, very powerful.
Andy, thank you so much for being so honest, so raw, and so passionate. I've loved this episode. I wish you nothing but the best. If people want to find out more about your comedy and how to get a hold of you, you've said that you've worked in recovery centers. People can hire you for private parties and such. How do they get a hold of you?
So the best two ways are my Facebook page. I got a fan page for my comedy. Just go Andy Gold Comedy or at Andy Gold Comedian. I pay a lot of attention to that. That's where I'm very active. And then I have a booking form to fill out on my website, andygold.org. I don't know why it's a .org, but it is for some reason. But it does the job. And I'm on Twitter and Instagram too, but the Facebook and the website are the two big ones. So.
Love you.
Thank you, man. Love you too.
Thanks, man. I appreciate it. You've been listening to Project Recovery. We want to say thanks to John, the unknown comic behind the booth back there, Dr. Matt Woolley. I'm Casey Scott. We'd also like to thank Pinnacle Recovery. They started me on my road to recovery. If you know somebody who needs some help, please start a conversation.
contents of this program are for informational purposes only. The program is not intended to be a substitute for professional medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. Always seek the advice of your physician, licensed therapist, or other qualified health provider with any questions you may have regarding a medical condition. Never disregard professional medical advice or delay in seeking it because of something you've heard on this program. KSL does not recommend or endorse any specific tests, physicians, products, procedures, opinions, or other information that may be mentioned on the program. Reliance on any information provided on the program is solely at your own risk.